Welcome to the latest episode of the Informing Choices mini-pod. Patrick van der Dam is Executive Director at the Netherlands Study Centre for Technology Trends and a contributor to the book Aftershocks and Opportunities 2, Navigating the Next Horizon. In his chapter, co-authored with Hans Stavleu, he poses the question, how might social and psychological factors shape the new normal of post-pandemic society? I've often used the phrase before, but I think Patrick and Hans are exploring the alternatives of restoring the old order and a total system reboot. Let's see. Patrick, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about you and your work, if you would.
Hello, Steve. Thanks for the introduction. I always have a reminder when I introduce myself. I'm not a futurologist or trend watcher. I'm someone who is interested in the future and especially how peoples and how societies and our organizations are dealing with the future. That's also basically the background of the chapter we wrote for the book.
Fascinating. And I share your fascination. My kind of entry point was to get excited about the technology, but very quickly you realize that actually the technology is just a tool and the really important things are about society and about people. So let's get into this then. So the first question I've got is, what are the critical lessons we should learn, do you think, from the pandemic if we are to prevent future crises?
I think one of the first lessons is to be more aware of how sensitive our society is and how vulnerable it is, and how we always think that things are going normal, that is indeed a normal way, which isn't. In every life, some rain must fall. And I think also that holds for every society. So we should always be prepared not only for the unknown, because that's indeed rather difficult, but we should also learn that these things are part of our lives and happen. And if they happen, the best we can do is cope with them, and indeed also try to prevent not those things as such, but often try to prevent the negative or bad consequences of those things.
So I think if I had to kind of play back my framing of what you said, it's not so much about predicting what will happen, but increasing our ability to deal with uncertainty and the unknown.
I think that's correct. I mean, these things have been predicted before. I mean, of course, people can be surprised, but if you're a little bit into this field and you often attend those expert meetings on possible future events, there's always the crash of the stock exchange or also pandemic. So it's normal business of every average futurist, so to say.
Yeah.
And you can't predict it, but you can't prevent it. So the best thing you can do is focus on let's say the first and second and third order effects of it and how it does impact you as a society or as an organization or as a person, and cope with those consequences in a far better way.
Yeah, that certainly resonates strongly with me. So how do you think the relationship between humans and science is likely to evolve as a result of the crisis? Because we've heard so often about decisions, particularly by governments, taken based on the science. So how do you think that relationship between science and humans is likely to evolve?
Well, I think that science has proved its points again. I'm not sure how it is in other countries, but at least in the Netherlands, let's say the support for science was already quite high and has even grown even further, despite all people who are in protest against all the government measures and measurements. But I think that science has more or less showed its added value. But at the same time, I have to say that also that science has also, I mean, this whole thing about developing vaccines and advising the government from a scientific or technological perspective also mainly shows how difficult science also is, because a lot of people think science has all the answers, and that always give very clear-cut answers, and this is how it's supposed to be done. To a certain extent, that is the case. On the other hand, if I worked for 15 years in a university and I studied at a university, and if you do that, you quickly learn that the key aspect of science is not certainty, but it is uncertainty. And most science deal with that and even find that the basic fun of their work.
Yeah.
And they often can, the outcomes of their work, they often can put it in that perspective. Whereas the average citizen, so to say, often considers science as the ultimate answer to all the questions. And that's also why I think a lot of people are proud of scientists. I mean, they developed the vaccines, but also they were a bit annoyed perhaps that it didn't work that fast. And
Yes.
and it didn't work for 100% correct, but it worked for 95% correct. And that's also has to do, I think, with communication, and also with the image of science has with most of the people, with most of the citizens.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to ask actually, as a follow-up to that, because it seems to me that perhaps a better understanding of science and scientists and the way science is conducted would actually help form a better relationship between society at large and science.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think most people think, once again, most people, which is quite general, I would say, but I think it's true, that think that science is a very formal way of working, which to a certain extent it is. There are certain rules, official rules, so to say, of transparency and getting your data right and following the right methods. But it's also a very creative activity. It's a lot about experimenting, not only in a literal sense of doing experimental tests in a laboratory, but also in the way you think about things and try new things. And in that sense, it's not as formal as a lot of people would expect it to be. And that also, I think, if scientists would communicate the way they work, the way they operate, I also think that would very much contribute to a bit more understanding, and also the fact that things are very difficult. I think as most scientists, as I just said, are saying that things are very uncertain. But also we underestimate the complexity of a lot of things we see around us. Yeah. For instance, the COVID pandemics. And all those scientists struggling with that, I think if you make it more transparent, I think that would increase the understanding of most people of how scientists work and the outcomes of their work.
Do you have a sense as well that society's perspective of scientists changes with the kind of technology that might be discussed at a point in time? And what's in my mind here is scientists working on COVID vaccines are helping to save our lives. Scientists working on intrusive technology like artificial intelligence over CCTV to monitor what we're doing is something we don't like. Yeah. So, do you feel that there is this kind of ebb and flow about how society regards science and scientists as well?
I think to a certain point you are right. I think in this respect, the examples you give is also necessary to make this distinction between science and technology. Yeah. Or science and the application of science, where it's in technology or in social technology, whatever you call it. I think that coming back to my remark of underestimating the work or the type of work scientists do, but also I think we're underestimating the effect science and technology has on our daily lives in good and bad sense, of course. And for instance, people who criticize technology and science often use a lot of technology based on a lot of scientific insights. And they're not aware of it. And that's why, since I also now often characterize our era as the technologicene, in terms of we have the Anthropocene, where we think that everything is on our planet is being decided and influenced by us, by human people, by humans, by ordinary people, and to a certain extent that is true, and that's also very good. But I think that the impact science and technology has is so big and is even growing. I expect to be in the future that we also live in the, I'm not sure whether it's a good English term, but in Dutch I call it technologicene, as opposed to the Anthropocene. So it's about the technological era we are very much focused on, and we are very much into, I think, right now. And to illustrate the large influence technology has on our daily lives as such.
Indeed. So what impact could this pandemic have, do you think, on how we make contingency plans for health emergencies? Because, we started talking about the pandemic, we kind of broadened out in terms of the relationship between humans and science, but, bringing it back again to the pandemic, how do you think what we've learned will help us make better contingency plans in the future?
That's a good question. To be quite honest, the question has a kind of assumption, I think it's also my assumption, that our contingency plans are not up to date right now.
Yeah.
Actually, to be quite honest, when I'm thinking back about the first COVID wave, so to say, in 2020, I was amazed, so to say, about how flexible and how adaptive we were as a society.
Yep.
And I have a background in telecommunication. I used to work for the Dutch PTT, so to say. And whenever it was what we are doing right now, we were using Zoom and WebEx and Google Hangout and Microsoft Teams. I was very curious about, do our networks can cope with that? And they did very much. And actually, I was really surprised how adaptive we were in our daily lives, in our work, as a society to adjust to the new situation. And that's I'm saying that because if we are very flexible and adaptive, that is perhaps the best contingency plan we can have.
Yeah.
I spoke in that period. I spoke to a lot of our members of our network who are often from large corporations, and they're dealing with supply chains and operational stuff. And actually, they shared this view with me, saying that actually, well, it's not easy, of course, and it has, of course, a lot of damage. But to a certain extent, they were quite able to respond to the new situation. And at the same time, also, what I said in the beginning, becoming more aware of how vulnerable we are in our society and in our economy. And also, creating this awareness of this self-reflection. Are we doing still the right things? Is this corona a symptom of the way we live, or is it something external, but well, still it's a kind of learning point to us?
Yeah.
I found that very interesting.
And is your sense that one of the things we can do is actually use technology to help us become more adaptable, rather than specifically looking at a particular piece of technology to deliver a solution?
Yeah, I think you're right. In terms of, well, I had this 2 weeks ago. I had a kind of expert meeting with people working in the healthcare industry, and we had this discussion also: how should we direct our funding for technology and research? And what we see what they do in that industry is they're very much focusing on developing new medicines to get us more older again. And yeah, is that the basic question? Is that the crucial question in that industry? And posing that question is also answering the question, so to say, because the ultimate outcome was no, it isn't, because people can become older, of course, but what about the quality of life? And is that really the big issue we have with healthcare, of being healthy? No, it isn't. Once again, in the Netherlands, there's a lot of problems that the healthcare industry, that we have so many elderly people, that the healthcare industry can't cope with that. So maybe you should direct your technology and research and your science as well to another direction, not to the new direction of being able to live more longer, making the whole system much more efficient, perhaps, and also much more human. So that's also one of the lessons you can have in this pandemic with regard to where do you put your money in.
That's fascinating. Patrick, our time is pretty much up. Let me first of all thank you so much for sharing your insights in what was a really interesting chapter in the book. So thank you so much for your time.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you, Patrick. And thank you everyone for listening. Do let your friends and colleagues know about the Informing Choices mini pod, and there'll be another episode along very soon.